During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, she faced a number of different threats to her throne, with a number of significant plots being wrapped in religion. One of the Queen's greatest threats came in the form of Mary Queen of Scots, who Catholics in the country believed was a legitimate queen, with Elizabeth being considered illegitimate. One of the most famous plots to Elizabeth's reign was the Babington Plot, which even resulted in Elizabeth ordering the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. But today we will be looking at an earlier plot, one in which spanned across the European continent, to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I and replace her with Mary Queen of Scots. So join us today as we look at the brutal execution of the Ridolfi Plot, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Thomas Howard, the 4th Duke of Norfolk, was born into the wealthy and influential Howard family, who had in generations before served Henry VIII and also caused him headache after his father Henry Howard was executed. Thomas, though, was the wealthiest landowner in England and had been proposed for being a possible husband for Mary Queen of Scots after she was imprisoned. This would have elevated Howard's ambitions and status, and he felt that Queen Elizabeth had underestimated him and his goals. So Howard decided to support rebellions, but he was a man who could not hold his nerve when the Northern Rebellion needed his support, and when it needed his backing, he withdrew it. Following this, he was imprisoned at the Tower of London, and was only allowed some degree of freedom when he confessed everything and begged for mercy, and then was transferred to house arrest. Things for Elizabeth I weren't great in 1570, and the Pope at the time had excommunicated the English Queen for her changes to religion, and he encouraged and allowed all Catholics to try and depose the English Queen and to rebel against her. The majority of the population would ignore the Pope's papal bull, but Elizabeth then began to become harsher against Catholics and those who were sympathetic to the English cause. However, one man in particular had been involved in planning against Elizabeth earlier than the Pope had encouraged. From 1569, Roberto Ridolfi, a banker from Florence, had been helping plan the Northern Rebellion and had been coming up with plans to overthrow the English Queen. Ridolfi himself had settled in London and had become an acquaintance of some of Elizabeth's courtiers. Ridolfi would conclude that to rid England of Elizabeth, then there would be a need for European help to do this, to restore Catholicism and also bring Mary Queen of Scots onto the English throne. With this, Ridolfi would then try and get the help of Europe, and a plan was assembled. It would have seen the Duke of Alba invade from the Netherlands with an army of 10,000 men. They would have then been helped by a rebellion in the north. Elizabeth I would then be murdered, and Mary Queen of Scots would be married to Thomas Howard to establish wealth and influence. Ridolfi overestimated the Catholic support in England, and he believed that he could gather a force of around 40,000 men. Thomas Howard would confirm to Ridolfi that he was a Catholic, but he and Mary Queen of Scots agreed to the plot out of desperation to improve their standing within England and their power. Ridolfi, after Mary and Thomas agreed to the plot, would then head off to Europe to gather some support of Europe's most important and powerful people, including the Pope, the Duke of Alba and King Philip II of Spain. Despite being just a banker, Ridolfi would find himself at the centre of a major plot to overthrow the English monarchy. He had previously been imprisoned for being suspected of distributing money to dissenting nobles involved in the Northern Rebellion, but was later released, and he was a spy for the Pope. As he was employed by the Pope, he could try and use this position to gain Catholic support for the coup, and he would use the excuse of banking for being able to travel to different countries to muster up support. However, Queen Elizabeth employed a spy and intelligence network to help her discover plots and attempts to assassinate her. Details on the conspiracy would be uncovered from the Spanish ambassador to England, and the government would be notified and the conspirators were arrested. Elizabeth was also sent a warning by the Grand Duke of Tuscany, who heard about the plot. Ridolfi's messenger Charles Bailey was arrested in April 1571 at Dover and had been found carrying compromising letters. Torture was then used on him, and he was forced to give over the cipher to coded messages. In August 1571, the Duke of Norfolk's secretaries entrusted a bag of silver coins to be delivered, but when the bag was opened, it contained £600 in gold from the French ambassadors, which was supposed to be sent to Scotland on Mary's behalf, and also letters were found written in cipher. Further interrogations were ordered, and a search at Howard House found a ciphered letter from Mary Queen of Scots hidden under a doormat. The Duke of Norfolk's staff were arrested and interrogated, and confessions were gathered by the use of torture or the sheer threat of it. On the 7th of September 1571, a warrant for the Queen was issued ordering Thomas Howard straight to the Tower of London for imprisonment. Whilst at the Tower, he did admit a large amount of the plot and the correspondence he had had with Mary Queen of Scots. After being placed on trial for his role in the conspiracy and being found guilty of high treason, Elizabeth was initially reluctant to order the execution of Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk. Elizabeth then eventually agreed to execute Norfolk after changing her mind a number of times, as Parliament in May 1572 had attempted to force her hand to act against those involved in the plot. It was deemed to sacrifice Thomas Howard to the wolves in the fact that Elizabeth's life and Mary Queen of Scots could be spared, and Mary in particular would be put off agreeing to further plots. Elizabeth would not take action against Mary. However, the Duke of Norfolk was to be executed on the 2nd of June 1572 on Tower Hill. Since Elizabeth had been on the throne, she had not in 14 years ordered an execution by beheading, unlike her father Henry VIII, in which Tower Hill, a site commonly used for beheadings at the time, was regularly seeing action. In fact, the scaffold on Tower Hill was falling to pieces, and a new one for the execution of the Duke needed to be built. In letters to his children and the Queen, Thomas Howard would write of his dignity and death, and it was clear at the time that Elizabeth didn't really want to order his execution. So on a brand new scaffold, Thomas Howard was led from his place of imprisonment, the Tower of London, and taken on a short walk to Tower Hill. As mentioned before, the site was a common place of execution during Henry VIII's reign, but it had since fallen into a poor state. Howard would have been approached by the axeman, who was planning on taking his head, and the Duke would have made a speech to the crowd, which had gathered there to witness the execution of a man who was accused of planning to murder the Queen. Norfolk would speak to the crowd, saying he was always a loyal subject of the monarchy, and he would kneel on the scaffold to embrace a priest who had accompanied him. As was customary for executions at the time, the executioner asked for Norfolk's forgiveness for carrying out the bloody office of taking his life, and Norfolk accepted this and then paid him. Thomas would then recite a psalm and say, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit," before removing his doublet and his cap. The executioner then passed him a blindfold, in which he refused to wear, bravely facing his death. In front of the crowd, the incredibly powerful and wealthy Thomas Howard's head was taken clean off his shoulders by an executioner, who would then have held his head up to the crowd, declaring him a traitor. It took just one strike of the axe to end his life, and following this his remains were collected in a box before being taken back into the Tower of London to be buried inside the Chapel St Peter ad Vincula, inside the tower's walls. He would be the only person really executed for the elaborate Ridolfi Plot, which saw European powers contacted to depose the Queen of England. After the discovery, Elizabeth would decide not to execute Mary Queen of Scots for her involvement, and Ridolfi himself would manage to avoid the same fate of the Duke of Norfolk. He had remained on the continent in Italy. However, should he have ever returned to England, it's most probable that he would have been executed also, in horrific fashion. Elizabeth would also expel the Spanish ambassador from England, and there was a growing intensity and ill feeling towards the Spanish, and it became real that there was a Spanish threat against England and Queen Elizabeth. The Ridolfi Plot did have a long list of co-conspirators that spanned across a number of European countries, and in particular involved some of the most powerful people across Europe. King Philip II of Spain had welcomed Ridolfi at court and discussed the plot, and he supported overthrowing Elizabeth and even supported her assassination. The Pope, Pius V, who had employed Ridolfi as his agent, even gave written approval for the plot, and Ridolfi would then take this to the Spanish king. So the brutal execution of Thomas Howard was the only extremely bloody reprisal in the Ridolfi Plot and its discovery. However, the effect was that there was growing concern around Mary Queen of Scots, and this was escalating. It was getting to a point where Mary could now be seen as an incredibly serious threat to Protestant Elizabeth, and Elizabeth would never speak again of restoring her to the throne of Scotland. There would be a more serious plot later, which would cause greater issue for Elizabeth, in which she would infamously order the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.